So our next project we're gonna do is a drawing exercise with colored pencils. First, you need to figure out your reference material. We're gonna give you a couple options. One is going to be a beetle. This is more of a pen and watercolor example, but you're gonna choose to either do a beetle about this size, or you can use a botanical drawing. So let's talk about reference material real quickly. So we have a few different examples for you to look at. Beetles, look for interesting beetles. There's all sorts of shapes and sizes of beetles. There's an artist, Christopher Marley, who carefully arranges beetles and takes pictures of them. So here's a couple of examples. But even if these are basic browns and blacks, you're not going to use black. You're going to figure out a way to make interesting color with the colored pencils. So you can see, even though this is watercolor, you can get the idea where there's pinks and reds and blues that give us a little bit more interesting color choices and still remain faithful to the original source material. You got to get a little creative with your colors and interpret the colors a little bit differently. Even if you choose a beetle like this, you're not just going to use green and be done. What other colors can you add to this to make it more interesting and add some depth? Some of you may not want to look at a beetle. I understand that. You can choose a couple of other insects. You can choose something like a bee. Try and avoid something that's too one-dimensional or kind of flat. Avoid things like a ladybug because it's a little too uniform. You want something that's a little more interesting. Besides beetles or insects, your other choice is a botanical drawing. Understand that botanical drawings go back to, 1700s. They are drawings of fruits, vegetables, plants. This was the way of documenting what they were. It's the same thing as the beetle. Even if this is green and red, you are going to look for ways to add in unexpected colors. So maybe there's a little bit of orange or pink in the lighter areas. Maybe this dark shadow is a little bit more of a purple or a blue. So if you choose to do a botanical, then you are actually looking for a traditional botanical drawing or illustration. So it should look like it's either done in colored pencil or watercolor or something like that. So now let's talk a little bit about colored pencils. Try and keep it sharp. Use a handheld pencil sharpener. If you have a big pencil sharpener at home, the problem is that the kind of wax, the binder in the pencils, can junk up your mechanical one. This is a really great resource. When you begin, they give you an example, circular stroke versus linear strokes. Keep your lines close and keep them short, but you have to watch out for things like the overlap. You need to have a very, very light touch where you're barely touching the paper, kind of some medium ones, and then this is where you're getting to more of what's called burnishing, where you're pushing down really hard to get that almost shiny kind of a look at the end. Different things with color. We've talked color theory before, but just remember, colored pencils, if you have 12 in your box, if you have 24 in your box, you have still a multitude of colors because you are going to blend. So here's an example of, this is reddish pink with blue to create purple. These layered together will create green, and so on. So let's review a couple of those points that were made in the book. When you start, you do have to think of the direction of your strokes. So if I'm going to do a linear stroke, then I do want to keep them close together. If I have them farther apart, I'm going to see the white of the paper. We do want to cover up the paper a little bit more. Obviously, you can keep white for the paper for highlights, but you also have white in your colored pencil box as well. As we go over it a second time, it's going to automatically darken. Some people like to do a circular approach. So part of it is that you are going to match up what you're drawing to your pencil stroke. It is a good thing to practice a value scale. If I'm barely touching the paper down, can I do that and still stay consistent? What if I'm pushing down with a little bit more? And same thing as before, you can hold the end of the pencil. You can do a reverse grip and barely touch the paper that way. Whatever you're comfortable with. Try to avoid holding it too much like you write, because if you use the same grip as when you write, you automatically will push down with lighter pressure, or heavier pressure. So work on getting the really, really light and the really, really medium pressures. And then you're going to build up to this heavy, heavy pressure is the burnishing stage. So those are the things to practice first, where you're going to start with a drawing. You're going to lay down a lighter value, and then we're going to add medium values and then darker values. So this is one approach. What I can do is if I'm working on that beetle, I can put a little bit of this yellow down. And then I have a couple of different options. So now I can use a little bit of a heavier pressure so I can start seeing it a little bit more. My other option is to start layering in another color. So depending on what set you have, you may have an orange, you may have kind of a muddier yellow, maybe there's a bit of a orangey kind of a red. At this point, it really depends on if I want to brighten it up, if I want to muddy it up, it kind of depends. So I like to have a test paper. I can quickly put down yellow. I can also put a little bit more pressure. I can now layer over a little bit of orange and see if I like that. Remember, when you're working with color, orange can be a really, really light value. It can be a really dark value too. What is that orange compared to this kind of orangey brown? In terms of darks and lights, they're very similar. Whereas this more muddy kind of yellow ochre is going to be a little bit of a lighter value. So I can take that into consideration too. If I want to layer over the yellow ochre, it's going to be not as noticeable. It'll be a little more subtle. If I want to layer over one of these other ones, it's going to be a little more noticeable, which is not a bad thing. And remember, I can always layer the yellow back on top of it. So I have some different options. So it's a good idea to test things out on a piece of paper first. So let's say I start with a subtle one. So now I'm gonna get a little bit more of a specific shading going on this side here. And remember, colored pencil is a patient medium. You can do it quickly, but you're gonna be able to see your pencil strokes a little bit more. So as I start building this up, it's there, it's just very, very subtle. You can see a difference between there and there for sure, but it's pretty subtle. I can also start thinking of where is going to be the highlight, where is going to be the shadow. If this is evenly lit, I'm going to have some shadow around the edges for sure. I'm definitely going to have some shadow on this in-between part, the different parts of its like exoskeleton or whatever it's called. But really, I am just looking for my first layer. I want to have, you know, some different variety like it shows right here. You can see on the bottom part, it's got dark, it's got light, it's got some almost white. And that's what I'm really looking for, is that movement. So I'm gonna work on this a little bit and then we'll be back.